designed to be, well, most of it's designed to be taught online. So, yeah.
Yeah. I have the same problem. In fact, they've moved my class to Monday, which has an implication for us because they've moved my class to Monday afternoon, and I need to get to Te Awaha by 1, which means we only have half an hour for this meeting, but I don't have to move our meeting. But we just have to finish in half an hour so I can get down there in time. Or I can go early and run it for us. Anyway, our time is fine, but every other meeting that I have on Monday, which is pretty much all of my postgraduate students, need to move.
Is that going to be a permanent change for you, or is it just the 2 weeks during lockdown?
I think it's going to be permanent for me because I've moved into Yulia's time slot, and Yulia is running her class entirely virtually, I believe.
Oh, yeah.
So Yulia's class can run virtually while mine is running using the HighFlex model, where I turn up in class and deliver to people who are both online and in class.
Yeah.
Which apparently is the newest, funkiest way of delivering teaching. And it works well if you've got a great camera setup, which we don't. But it seems to be working okay.
Once we finish this meeting, I'll borrow you for like 2 minutes. Discuss another situation related to that. Hi, Lee.
Well, we've got 2 minutes today. We don't have 2 minutes any other day. Today we have 2 minutes.
Oh, okay, awesome.
Hi, Lee. Yes, we've been having a whole conversation. We know you're there. What's Yulia got you doing, by the way? What are you doing for Yulia's class at the moment? Yeah. Yeah, because of course last week you did the whole what I did with my MIT thesis. Yeah. Yeah. God, I don't remember what's happening anywhere at the moment. Cool. You had some questions, which I noticed, Dax, you've answered.
Yep. And as part of that, I also went into Google Scholar, found a few interesting things. There's a paper from Australasian Information Security Conference, ASIC, which is one of the better ones as far as I know, 2009, Passwords and Perceptions, from 2 researchers from Auckland. So that's just on 10 years old. But that leads out to a variety of other papers. And for these things, for Lee, definitely there's over a page of, actually, effectively 2 columns, which is a page on past research. So for a lot of these papers, even though it's old, it'll give you a lot of ideas about other areas of research to look into. And while they're talking about passwords and perceptions, they've got a nice article, Adams and Sasse, 1999, password-related user behaviours, including password construction, frequency of use, password recall, and work practices. So one of my recommendations would be grab that 1999 paper and now look at it from 20 years ago and then do comparisons with password recall and work practices based on the idea that there'd be a lot more sites that would be storing passwords for people, that work practices may still be the same with regards to, say, login requirements. That must be 8 characters and this, that, and everything else. But other things may well have changed. I appreciate we're not doing interviews now, but they also outline a paper from 2000 which interviewed 30 participants. So as part of your thesis, it's always a good idea to state, this is the way I am doing this research. Other alternatives could have been interviews with subject matter experts, as shown by this paper. It could be, say, there's a 2004 survey of 218 Collins students about password generation and usage behaviour. So you'd refer to that paper. And this is kind of a philosophical issue. I don't mind things that are older than 5 years if there's value to it. 2004 is really on the boundary. I would look to see papers that cite that 2004 paper, because people will still be surveying college students and then go from there. So definitely read the 2004 paper, definitely get some ideas from it. Go to Google Scholar, see who cites that 2004 paper, and then try and pick things more recent. And as soon as I say that, I am just going to throw that into Google Scholar myself and see what comes back with. If you have troubles, I will send through the initial article from 2009. Here's the other trick. The 2004 paper, Brown, Bracknell et al., 2004, Generating and Remembering Passwords, isn't computer science, it's applied cognitive psychology. So a lot of things you'll be doing, because you're looking at behaviours and all that, may be in quite different spaces than we've normally got.
Yeah, it is important to try and get some of those newer papers, because the older ones give you the basis of knowledge, but the newer ones tell you what's most recent. And it's your job to kind of merge them together into a model that says this is what we think people's behaviour, how people behave around these things, and that's what we're going to test. One of the interesting things you can find from the papers is where they have applied questionnaires. Keep a copy of all their questionnaires so you can look at the kind of questions that they're asking, and that will give you a really good idea of the sort of questions that you should look to ask as well. And you can combine them, or just use one if you decide it's a good idea to do a then and now comparison, or something similar to that. And you can also run a similar instruments yourself. If they start talking about instruments, they're talking about the questionnaire. So a survey instrument is the questionnaire. So if you're reading these papers and you get confused by why they're talking about instruments, they're not talking about violins, they're talking about the questionnaire. It's a very common thing to call a questionnaire an instrument. But it's important to have a look at where people have done surveys. It's important to look at what they've asked as well, what questions they're focusing on. Something from 2000 is going to be quite interesting as an example of older behaviour, because behaviour will change over 20 years, depending on new things become available, people's understandings change. So there will be quite a big move from 2000 to 2020, but that's actually going to provide you with some really interesting discussion points. So it's worth gathering resources from a range of times, but you might want to, when you start thinking about organising them and when you start thinking about organising them in your thesis, you might almost organise them to some extent in time groups if there's a lot of material out there. So like pre-2010, and then sort of the newer research, depending on what's there. But I'm presuming that there should be a reasonable spread of possible papers around this kind of topic, because it's reasonably topical. And it's an ongoing thorn in the side of any kind of IT professional, is getting people to set a decent password. So, I mean, that's useful. I'm not sure what Yulia has you doing, but we need to start getting you into writing a proper proposal. Does she have you writing a proposal in the form for the Research and Ethics Committee? What's your next assignment? Right. Yeah. Yeah, and that's correct, actually, because everybody's topic is very different. Has she given you the form for... I'm still trying to figure out exactly what you're doing. Has she given you the because you've handed in... What have you handed in already? That's a mini proposal, isn't it? You've already handed... So you've handed that in. It's done. Okay. So you need to write the proposal. Right.
When is that presentation scheduled for? So what's the due date on that? Cool.
Okay. There's a form you need to use for this, which is the form for the Research and Ethics Committee. So you will need to fill the form in with the information that you have in terms of things like research problem and research question, and also with methodology. I don't remember, I think you still have a reasonable amount of work to do on methodology, if I remember correctly. So I think we need to come up with a plan on how you're going to address the next few weeks and get that sorted out. I'm just actually trying to go to Julia's class to see what she's got, because I've got access to her class. See what she's got here and what she's actually telling you to do. You will have to go to the Research and Ethics Committee because your proposal involves humans. But this isn't too daunting. So long as you write it up acceptably, it will go through without too much in the way of a problem. Assignment 2. So you've done assignment 1. What is assignment 2? Proposal presentation. Assignment 3 is the full... Oh, that's interesting. So assignment 3 is the full proposal. And that's due... When is that due? So you do have to do the full proposal. Has she given you the form yet for it? Okay. Yeah. Yeah, we've had this discussion already. Well, that's easy enough to fix grammatically.
You just drop by the ands and put a comma in and it should be okay.
Yeah, that's easy to fix. Creation.
Yeah. Keep in mind, one of these things will be very close to your overall title. And someone a while ago said the title should be eye-catching, which is why mine tend to be themed. So keep in mind, some of these words will be recycled into the title. Then there'll be a major question, and then there'll either be sub-questions or research objectives. I think I sent you Ethan Kwan's thesis, and I think initially he went a wee bit too far with his sub-questions or his research objectives. He wanted to cover a lot of things, which was great, but I also think he possibly put in just a wee bit too much. So you could just have the one main question to do with people's understanding of password strength or people's perceived value of resources they protect with passwords, and then the sub-questions would be anything else, or research objectives would be anything else not covered in that main question. So definitely send through the way you want to word it, and then we'll discuss that probably via email, because I think that's going to be easier, only because of time limitations. And when we get down to specific wording, invariably someone comes up with a great way of describing it and no one writes it down, and then we have to repeat it. As an example, when I was working with Hank would often have a really specific form he was filling in. He'd have a really good idea, and then we'd have a face-to-face meeting, and he'd just ask me, right, Dax, how would you describe this? So I'd describe it, and then he'd pick out the best parts. One time, unfortunately, I spent 3 or 4 minutes answering the question. He goes, wow, that was amazing. Can you remember what you said? I said, I had no idea. I thought you were writing it down. So we had to go through the whole process again for about 15 minutes to get the best parts. So I think for specific technical wording of questions, objectives, and titles, write down how you see it, what you want the focus of your research thesis to be, and then the 3 of us will kick it around via email until we're all relatively happy that can be answered, that makes sense, and the ordering makes sense as well. As just one quick final thing, as an aside, if you check my master's, I think it was either the 4th or 5th listed contribution or objective is listed once in introduction, and it's never spoken of again. And it was only after it gone through examination and the examiners didn't comment on it that I was discussing with someone. I says, right, that objective you had was really interesting. What did you do with it? It's like, oh, that was supposed to be removed before examination. So try and make sure everything that you promise in introduction is addressed in conclusion and supported somewhere in the body. So don't be too concerned if you've got a lot of ideas now. Once you've actually done the research, we can go back and trim them out if they're not dealt with.
Or vice versa, actually. We can, if you come up with something interesting, we can always add it later. I think, okay, this is what I think. It's not going to help you very much. Have a look at what's already known. If the literature deals with, if you're reading a paper and it deals entirely with password creation, it doesn't discuss usage. And you're dealing with another paper and it's discussing usage, but not password creation, you can see that the literature is splitting the 2 concepts apart. And then it's best to deal with them separately. If you find that the literature deals with both of them together, then deal with both of them together, because that will make most sense. Part of me, I don't know a lot about password creation apart from my own personal experience of it, but I would have said that usage was a relative of creation, and the reason being that the way you're going to use it would affect the kind of password that you created. So I remember there was a fashion some time ago for using the whole lines out of things like fairy stories and limericks and stuff for passwords. So, Mary had a little lamb, its fleece was white as snow might be your password, but you wouldn't necessarily create that because it's a pain to use it. So you might create something that's related to it by perhaps using the first letter of the words, but you're not going to use the whole phrase, although it was a fashion for a while to do that. So I think you'll find that the 2 are closely enough related that you'll need to study them both, but it's easy to add usage into this question. Just a grammatical addition.
Related issue, I want to say it was 2018, but I'd have to check. It was definitely around about then. It may have been 2017 or 2019. Time flies when you're having fun. The person who originally came up with the idea of passwords must be 8 random alphanumeric characters that aren't recognised as anything, pretty much came out and said, yeah, that was a good idea 30 years ago, but now horse, carriage, man, woman, camera, it makes a lot more sense because it's equally difficult to break, but it's a lot easier to remember because it's 5 distinct words.
Yeah.
If you want to create a new password, you can still change it to man, woman, camera, horse, carriage, which is going to be equally hard to break and still relatively difficult to guess. Even if someone knew all 5 words, they don't necessarily know the correct sequence, and it'll still take at least about, I think, 125 guesses, 64 guesses on average, if they're all completely random ordered. So definitely go to Shania's blog. He discussed when this idea came out. Other people came out at the same time. So the password creation rules from, say, because it was definitely before 2015, would be quite different from the advice given in 2019. And there may not necessarily be a lot of really good research around why that is the case. That if people have changed, if people knew this, if they're applying it, if they've bothered updating their passwords, if they're required to update them, all these wonderful types of things could be fairly new, or this may have been a problem that was addressed in 2018. I will try and find that article and send it through just so that we're all on the same page when it happened.
I mean, that's one of the things that you're going to have to consider in your both in your literature and in your design for your questionnaire, that fashions and password creation have changed. And while you might ask a question about, how do you choose or how do you decide, it's partly going to be, you're going to need to be thoughtful in the way you ask your questions, because this is going to be an issue. So, yeah. Okay, what do you need to, Yeah, I think so. Rather than mucking around.
Stop that one particular point for one quick second. There's another paper, I can't recall the dates, 2018, Generational Differences in Password Management Behaviour. If you get nothing out of that paper, there is a table on page 3 that covers 13 different research publications on password management behaviour as a table. So it tells you the number of participants, the type. Most of them were university students, but some were employees. Where the research took place, the year of it, roughly what the findings were. So this paper, it may be completely irrelevant for everything else you're doing, but it gives you a nice, strong basis for your literature review. And unfortunately, only one of those is from 2015. But the paper itself, because it's 2018, you could discuss that paper and say, this is background literature review. And then they talk about all the things that they've done based on all this prior research as well. So definitely find that paper and read over it. It's only 7 pages of story, and then it gets into 3 pages of references. So definitely make sure you find that paper. And maybe that should be a goal for next week, is either the plan around what you're doing, or in a week's time, a brief list of the research papers you've looked at or something like that. One of those two is probably a good use of time.
I think that's an excellent idea, actually, because that kind of literature summary is going to help you immensely in working out your what kind of questions you're going to ask and what is already known. So I think that's actually a really good idea, and then probably should get stuck into that and do that this week. The other thing that I'm not sure because I haven't seen the paper, Dax, does it include methodology?
For that one I just mentioned.
Yeah.
Sorry, I will just reopen it. As far as I can tell, very briefly, they were all surveys.
Right.
Let me see.
It might be helpful it might be helpful to include the methodology too. Can you flick the link through to Lee and myself?
Yep,
Right.
I will just copy the basic details, because as well as it's science open, so it just gives me some silly stuff, but I'll fire that one through right now as we're meeting.
Yeah. I think that's a good plan. Work on literature this week, work on methodology next week. Because the methodology is reasonably straightforward. Once you've got the literature together, you'll see what other people have done, and also you'll get a good idea of what they've put in their own questionnaires, and that will help you immensely. So I think that's a good plan. So literature this week, methodology next week, putting it into the framework the following week. You're going to need to submit it to Yulia according to what I can see on her web page by early September. So we'd be looking to, once you're submitted to Yulia, then we'll knock it into shape and put it to the committee for the end of September. I think mucking around with the research question at the moment is a little bit, I think what you have is okay. Leave it with that for the moment. We can add usage easily with no problem whatsoever, depending on what you find in the literature this week. Okay. So password managers. Oh, password managers. Save the passwords on browsers. Okay, the password manager thing is the interesting sideline from DAX 2. That's a new invention that goes into the newer literature, and that should emerge with any luck in the newer parts of the literature. But it might be worth it. If you don't find anything on password managers this week in the literature, might be worth a little additional exploration to see whether you can find anything in that regard from the last couple of years, because they're pretty new. Yeah. Does that help? Hmm. Hmm. That's a difficult class. That's a very difficult class, especially if English is not your first language. That's an insanely difficult class. You do get better. The only reassurance I can offer you is that you get better over time. Methodology is actually pretty straightforward for this because it's a survey method. Everybody who does a survey method pretty much does the same thing. So you derive a model, a list of hypotheses, and then you roll a survey out based on that. So it's any paper that you're reading from the past that's used a survey will pretty much tell you how to do it. And they'll tell you what their questions are as well. So straightforward for you to do. This is one of the reasons we weren't keen on you doing interviews, because that would have been much harder, I think. But you will get better. Practice helps. But yeah, I would recommend, as I recommended in my class, that as you go through each paper, you take notes and make sure that you understand what they did, what the point was, what their method was, and then the kind of table that this paper that DAX has sent through. I'm just going to have a quick look at. That kind of thing helps you a lot, doing that sort of doing summary tables. Well, that's quite nice, that, isn't it? That table summary. They've got the type of students, how many there were, mixture of age and genders, password behaviour findings, general summaries, and age effects, if any. He obviously was interested in age. Yeah, just a summary table can help.
And it's the major problem with any research is either you don't quite know the exact right phrase to start with, and eventually you have to stop. You must have, and in your case, because you'll have over summer, the time, the survey, this goes back to planning, but we'll do it probably another week or via email again. I would imagine that the survey itself probably makes sense for February, March, or probably February, just when everyone's back. So you would have all the summer to finally lock down your literature, but the questionnaire normally has to go to the ethics committee for sign-off. So we will have to juggle that round a wee bit. My feeling is there'll probably be a preliminary, is this research approved, and then possibly go back over summer and refine it, may be the situation. Likewise, we can't know exactly what's going to be happening with lockdown and all those other types of things going forward.
Yeah.
So possibly earlier, maybe better. It really depends how much of this is students versus general population and things like that. Also, I don't know how long we should budget for your write-up, which may or may not be a problem. But as I said, the paper I've just sent through today will definitely be useful. It's then what you do with it, which is the next trick on top of that. But I would be looking at probably very briefly all the papers they listed, just in case there's something interesting in those papers, or definitely Google Scholar all of those papers to see what's been cited and use the date range to drop the date range to 2015 onwards, and see which papers are citing those papers that were listed. And that'll keep you busy definitely for the whole week.
Oh, yeah. No problem with that. I think with the questionnaire, we have put questionnaires to the committee before, and we've only ever had to go once. And normally we call it an indicative questionnaire. So long as it's got pretty much all the questions and it looks like you know what you're doing, the committee doesn't say come back with your finalised questionnaire, which has worked fine for us. And in fact, we got one through where we described what the questionnaire would ask without actually providing the questionnaire, on the basis that the questionnaire couldn't be developed until the model had been developed. But I think in this case, because the model is likely to be a lot less complex than that student, who was Nina, and I should send you her thesis because she's finalised her thesis, you'll find that it's easier for you to develop a questionnaire. The best case scenario here is in one of the papers that you discover, someone gives you a questionnaire or you get a number of questionnaires from a number of papers that you can then adapt, because that means you don't have to develop your own questionnaire. And then you just have to verify it or validate it. This paper, unfortunately, doesn't have a questionnaire with it. Oh, because it's a literature survey.
Yeah, although they do some stuff later, but it's not too clear.
Yeah. But you should definitely do this kind of literature summary. And I think you should do that this week, because it's going to tell you who, what they used, and include columns just for you, whether or not they have a questionnaire. Save the questionnaire separately so we can all look at what's already out there. And a separate column for methodology if it's a non-survey methodology, because it's helpful to you to know what people are doing.
And if you look at my PhD, which I think I sent through as well, there's a table on page, I want to say 67, but that might be the flowchart, where it compares lots of different papers in the field. I had to be careful because one paper, Al-Aman et al., was perfect with one problem. For my research, I needed to know, so say people purchased 100 hard drives, how many of those hard drives were damaged to the point data could not be retrieved. Every other paper talks about that in some meaningful way. Al-Aman et al. Do not mention that number, and that's what kills it. Their research, as far as I'm concerned, would be perfect if it just had that one figure. But every other paper you can determine it and make a nice table for theirs. You can't. It stops it being comparable. So twofold, whenever you're discussing research, always be positive, even if it's just this paper was really useful because it gave a great definition or it described a time and place. Never be negative. for your own personal writing, you could give it, say, a score from, say, 1 to 5 about how useful it is. When you actually publish it, you would merely include the papers that you like and the reasons why you like them. But definitely, as Martha and I are both saying, start thinking of how you can organise these, thinking how you can turn it into a table. There'll be some variations on that table that we just sent through. So have a real quick look at my PhD for the table on that. I didn't do it in my master's because ultimately there was one paper that was brilliant from a stats perspective and one paper that was extremely good from a methodology perspective. All the rest just had supportive, interesting things that related to it. So it was much easier just to talk about the specific literature and say, these two are the best, and here's other papers that relate to it. So definitely have a quick look over my master's methodology section for other ideas. But when you know what to look for, a couple of them got put in purely to be, there's this idea, Demetal. That's a great idea that I have no idea what it means, that these researchers used once. I'm not going to use it, but it's a great idea apparently. So it just bulks it out. Whereas in your case, a questionnaire makes sense because a lot of people have done a lot of questionnaires.
Yeah, for sure.
Yep.
It's nice and tidy too in terms of the write-up. The write-up's pretty clean. Remember, if you're using Google Scholar, that it tends to bring up to the top the papers that have been cited the most. This is both an advantage and a disadvantage to you because the ones that come up to the top in a Google Scholar search tend to be older because they've been cited more. So they've had time to be cited. But you can also click on Cited By, and it tells you who has cited those papers. So that helps you with going forward. Because I've just put password management and survey into Google Scholar, so I only got surveys. And the top, I don't know how many articles are all at least 2010 or older, but that's because they're the most cited. But there's one here. Actually, I'll just share my screen because it'll be easier just to show you this. There's one. This is the search here. Can't get this off. Here we go. And you can see these top ones are all. That one's 2010. This one's 2006. That's 2010. That's 2008. You can see all of these are quite old, and the reason is they're highly cited. So Google Scholar brings them to the top of the search. But you can see here that this one here, Password Management Strategies for Online Accounts, is highly cited, 446 citations. The reason it's so highly cited is partly because it's so old. It was published in 2006. But if you click on who has cited this paper, now it's bringing you the list of papers that cited that one. The way to cut this to the more recent ones is to choose since 2016, and it will bring you the most recent ones. So you can see that it's got more studying the impact of managers on password strength and there's a whole bunch of stuff in here. So you just remember to use those sorts of methods to get to the papers that you want. I mean, you can go right back to the base search on password management and survey and just go since 2016, and that's going to bring you the most recent ones. But you can see that these are not as highly cited because they're newer.
Likewise,
this one here on. Sorry?
Right in front of you, if you go back one screen, I think it is, because this is the 2016. So if you just go back to all the time.
Yep.
And then it's one of the top 5. It's got 150 citations on it.
This one? Psychology of Password Management, trade-off between.
That, to me, is probably going to be an absolutely amazing, useful article because it probably also talks about what value people put on it. And they've even told us right in the opening that it's going to be a survey because there are always going to be surveys. So for me, that's probably going to be one of the more useful ones. But there's Martha saying if you click on Cited By and limit it to 2016.
Yeah, you got a bunch still.
Yeah, there's still be a lot of papers that have cited that one.
Well, that's interesting. This is a common problem. Frequently entered passwords reused across websites. Better managed than memorized. A study of what motivates users to not follow computer security advice. I mean, there's a lot of stuff. There's tons of stuff.
Yeah. This is
the trick is getting recent, relevant.
What you're saying and what's scrolling on the screen's got a slight lag in it. But yeah, as you've highlighted that paper about whether people are following security instructions or not, will again be really useful to do with the psychology of security and whether people are making bad choices because they don't know or they don't care. And then that goes, hopefully that talks about the perceived value of the resource that's protecting. But the alternative risk is lazy people are lazy. That for all resources, they're picking bad passwords, rather than some resources are more protected than others.
There's another one here. Nudging folks towards stronger password choices, providing certainty is the key. There's a lot of stuff.
Yeah,
go and slog through it. This is a time-consuming exercise. But here's the good news. You do it now and you do it right, then when you're writing your thesis up, you already have the framework sitting there and it makes your life a lot easier. So, but this is the hard part of the work if it's going to take you a while to get used to reading these papers. Even with English as a first language, academic work is not always easy to read. So it takes time and you get into a habit with it. And that habit, you need to develop the habit. You'll be fine once you've got that. Okay. So you know what you need to do? Okay, perfect. Well, we'll see you next week at 11:30. Okay.
Awesome. No worries.
See ya.
Catch you later. Bye.